Dean, if I want to know whether God exists, which I do, I think, well, God has to be this all-powerful, all-perfect individual of some kind. And therefore, that individual, being all perfect and all good, would make the best possible world, or else he wouldn't be all perfect and all powerful. But if this is the best of all possible worlds, I got more problems with all the evil in the world. I mean, I just tossed the whole logic and way of thinking away.
Right. Well, it is very difficult to believe that this is the best of all possible worlds. But I also don't think we should expect God to make the best of all possible worlds if there is no best possible world. So, making the best possible world may be like making the best possible amusement park, where you could always add some rides, you could always, every year they fiddle with the park to make it, better, right? If the best of all possible worlds, if that's just if that's an incoherent notion. I mean, possible worlds are kind of like mathematical objects. They're abstract things. There's just a space of possibilities, and the facts about them are necessary facts. So if there's no best possible world, well, that's a necessary fact. And it seems very plausible to me to suppose that there isn't. Now, that doesn't by itself solve the problem of evil, right? It doesn't explain how this could be, of all the possible worlds, this is one of the ones that's creatable by a good God.
Sure, but
it could explain why, there might be a little more badness than there could have been.
So we don't hold it against God that he didn't make a best possible world, because it would be like holding it against God that he couldn't make a round square. I mean, something impossible. Right. But it does ask, why did God create this kind of world, which we assume is a good world? Why didn't he create a better world than this world? And it also asks the question, how did God choose among all the different possible worlds he could have chosen to choose any world?
One thing I think it's important to keep on the table for anybody who's trying to justify God's ways to us, you'd better say that there's a lot more going on than we see, right? And that could be in many respects, there could be more going on. So, of course, there's the idea that there's an afterlife. I think without an afterlife, things are much harder to make sense of.
In terms of the evil in the world.
In terms of the evil in the world.
If you want to believe in God.
Right. To the question, well, why not a slightly better world than this then? I mean, suppose we had to be able to choose between good and evil in order for there to be morally significant stuff going on at all. Moral character traits, they have to be developed, and so on. Well, then there's got to be some evil. You might say, well, but why so much? Why were we allowed such strong temptations? Well, again, there may be a little bit of the no best possible world thing going on, where, there needs to be some inclination towards evil, but could be more, could be less, and there's no absolute optimum. There's also the very real possibility, it seems to me, that this isn't the only universe with free creatures in it. So you say, well, why? We could have been a little better, still have been free to choose between good and evil, but a little better at discerning the differences and so on. Well, there may be creatures like that. And we might still be worth creating for our kind.
So in that sense, that God would have created multiple universes or multiple situations, each with different levels, and why would God do all those different kinds of things? I mean, if one is clearly better than the other, then he's putting us in a situation that's suboptimal. Even if there's no absolute best, why are we in a position that we're below somebody else? I feel bad now.
Yeah. Well,
I really start doubting God.
Yeah, so if there is no optimal, then everybody will feel bad if you feel bad. So perhaps none of us should feel bad, and we should all feel grateful to have at least the amount of inclination towards the good that we have, rather than being even more inclined toward evil. Now, I mean, there's lots of evil that I find utterly mysterious, how to explain its consistency with a good God. I'm still hopeful and optimistic that and I think more can be said than you might think. But I think the idea that because things could have been better, and yet we still have been allowed to choose between good and evil, just not have done as much evil, whatever. The idea that there's no absolute perfect amount of temptation towards the bad as opposed to inclination towards the good, or no perfect amount of badness that we could bring about as opposed to a little bit less or a little bit more. If that's right, then we shouldn't complain that there's a kind of gratuitous little bit, because there will always be some that you could sort of wish away and not eliminate freedom to do good and evil.
If there are this diversity of different possible worlds that God could have created, and we know He didn't create the best, how then, prior to creation, since you believe in God, did God decide which of these infinite possible worlds to actualize?
Well, I guess He liked some of them. So if we think there are many universes, I don't know if there are, of course, I have no idea whether that's a plausible thing to suppose. I do think within the kind of Western theistic tradition, it is generally thought that there are whole realms of beings that we don't know anything about. So we shouldn't think that we're the center of everything, right? That there aren't any other free creatures that God cares about. So I do think it's quite consistent to suppose, and really sort of plausible for believers in God to think that there is a lot more than just what's going on this planet. But why would He choose some and not others? Well, I guess He liked some. And it's a matter of, I mean, from our point of view, it's a matter of His deigning to create creatures like us. It's a matter of grace.